Hello and welcome to The Critique. Today we're digging into The Architecture of Anti-Fragile Wealth, a strategic essay by Dr. Pooyan Ghamari. It argues for a radical shift away from the 60-40 portfolio towards AI, DeFi, and a strategic jurisdiction.
Let's do it. It's a really provocative piece, a manifesto, really. But I think we can help sharpen the blade to make it, truly actionable for someone reading it.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The first big thing for me is while the manuscript absolutely succeeds as a philosophical manifesto, it risks losing the practical investor by staying way too high level with its definition of creative capital allocation.
That is exactly where the friction is. I mean, the text says things like, capital allocation has become a creative act, and human judgment and machine efficiency now blend together.
Beautiful sentences.
They're great sentences, but they're also very abstract concepts. The reader is told that they need to be a builder, not a buyer, but it completely lacks the granular how.
Right.
It describes the what, the turbulence, the disorder, the old model breaking down so effectively. But it just creates this huge gap between the diagnosis, which is frankly terrifying, and the prescription, which feels a little vague.
I agree. It feels like we're standing at the edge of a cliff, and we're told we need to build a glider to survive the fall.
But there are no blueprints.
No blueprints, no materials list, nothing.
Precisely. If I'm an investor reading this, someone actually managing capital, I'm nodding along with the whole death of the old map part. That resonates.
Of course.
But then I get to the part about blending human judgment. And I'm just left wondering what that actually looks like on a Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Is it a dashboard? A piece of software?
So the suggestion here is to ground all that philosophy in a hypothetical before and after story, or maybe a really specific case study of one of these anti-fragile strategies in action.
Yes, we have to move from the abstract to the concrete and fast. The reader needs to see the machinery actually working.
So for example, that section about moving from buyer to builder, instead of just saying it, why not just drop in a little vignette? Contrast a specific old map investor with a new era investor.
That would be so effective. You could have John, the old map guy, who's just sitting on bonds and indexes.
And he's watching his money just evaporate.
Yeah, watching his purchasing power get eaten by inflation he can't control. He's a passenger. And then you contrast him with Jane, the new era investor. But we have to go deeper than just saying she's different. We need to see the mechanics of her day.
I see what you're getting at. So illustrate what blending human judgment and machine efficiency actually looks like.
Don't just say it.
Describe a scenario where she uses an AI tool to spot an arbitrage opportunity in DeFi, that's the machine part, and then she applies her human ethical judgment to decide on the best jurisdiction for those assets.
That's fascinating because it operationalizes the philosophy. Suddenly, creative allocation isn't just a buzzword, it's a workflow.
Right.
You could even just list 3 specific questions an investor should ask a protocol developer or a chip maker before they deploy capital. Instead of saying, understand how systems function, give them a checklist.
Like, where are your physical servers located?
Exactly. Question 1. Question 2. Is the smart contract code audited by a firm I trust? Question 3. What's the energy dependency of this operation? That turns the whole thing from a sermon into a practical manual.
Yeah, it gives the readers something to do the second they put the essay down. Okay, moving on. The next big point for me was the transition between the immaterial world of DeFi and the very material world of specialized chips and energy systems. It feels really abrupt.
I felt that whiplash too. The text treats DeFi, which is all math, trustless, ethereal, and infrastructure, chips, cables, energy, as these 2 separate pillars.
Like 2 different taptoms.
Yeah, almost. And they're both presented as solutions to this disorder. But the symbiotic relationship between them is it's underexplored. It jumps from rules that are visible in DeFi to scarcity carries real weight with physical stuff. But it doesn't connect the dots. It doesn't show how the physical protects the digital.
And the argument is that one can't exist without the other, right? But the text, it treats them more like neighbors than like conjoined twins.
Exactly. And isn't there a risk there? By treating them as separate assets, it overlooks the fact that the physical is the security layer for the digital. I mean, if the power goes out, Your blockchain stops confirming blocks. Simple as that.
So the suggestion is to build a much stronger argumentative bridge, position the physical infrastructure not just as another asset class, but as the literal life support system for all the digital wealth you just described.
That makes total sense. You could even take it a step further. What if you explicitly argued that computing power is the new gold standard backing the digital currency?
Ooh, I like that.
I mean, in the old world, gold backed the dollar, at least in theory. In this new architecture, computing power and energy are what back the network. That is the new standard of value.
That clarifies the relationship instantly. And when he's talking about the materials required for electrification, he could link it directly back to the algorithmic feedback loops.
Show how the algorithm just cannot exist without the copper and the lithium.
Right. And that makes the commodity a derivative hedge on the technology itself.
A derivative hedge on the tech itself. I love that phrasing. That makes the investment thesis so much tighter. It explains why you're buying the copper. You're not just speculating on metal prices, you're hedging your exposure to the digital network.
You could even use the core concept anti-fragility to bind them.
How so?
Well, explain that software can be forked. I can copy your code and start a new coin tomorrow, but you can't fork an energy grid.
Right. You can't just copy-paste a hydroelectric dam or a semiconductor fab?
Exactly. So that makes the physical asset the anchor that prevents the digital asset from becoming vaporware. It adds this layer of realism that the current draft is kind of missing.
It really does. It turns two good points into one undeniable system. Okay, let's look at how he handles the traditional financial world. The absolute dismissal of it. Phrases like, the classic portfolio was built on comfort. That world has already faded. It risks alienating moderate investors.
People who still have a foot in that world.
Yeah, people who still see value in those structures. The text presents this very binary choice. The old map, which is broken, versus the new map, which is anti-fragile.
It's a bit of a burn-the-boats approach, isn't it?
It is. And while that might appeal to the true believers, does it convince the high-net-worth individual who still has 80% of their wealth in equities? Probably not. It ignores the reality that traditional systems are the on-ramps for this new wealth.
You still need a bank account to buy the crypto.
You need the old world to access the new one. So the suggestion here is to reframe the argument from replacement to something more like evolution or integration.
Acknowledge that the old markets still have some use, even if their returns are diminishing.
That's the key. Instead of saying the 60-40 split is a house built on moving ground, which sounds like imminent collapse, frame it as a decaying utility.
It's still useful.
It's still useful for short-term liquidity, paying bills, whatever. But it's dangerous for multi-generational wealth preservation. That's a much more nuanced and, frankly, more accurate take.
And this would be the perfect place to bring in the idea of a barbell strategy. It's a nod to Nassim Taleb, who coined anti-fragile, so it just fits perfectly.
Oh, that's a great connection. You keep safe assets in traditional banks for operating expenses. That's the handle of the barbell. Low risk, low return.
But you move the growth capital into the high-risk, high-reward, decentralized structures.
The weight's at the end. Yeah. That shows the reader you don't have to be some radical to adopt this strategy. You just have to be rational. It lets them step into the new map without feeling like they're jumping off a cliff.
It bridges the gap. Also, the text could talk about central banks not just as enemies, but as predictable actors.
Meaning?
Meaning their policy experiments can actually be gamed by a smart investor. If you know they're going to print money, that manipulation becomes a predictable variable you can bet on, instead of just something to complain about.
I like that. It turns the investor from a victim into an agent. You're not suffering from inflation. You're positioning yourself to benefit from the policy that causes it. A much more empowering stance.
Okay, let's move to the fourth point. The section on choosing where to stand, the jurisdiction piece, is conceptually strong, but it relies too much on generalities, about neutrality in Switzerland, without exploring the actual friction of implementing it.
This was the part that felt the most like a travel brochure to me. He says jurisdiction turns into a tool. He praises Switzerland, but it just glosses over the immense friction of distributed custody.
It sounds way too easy in the current draft.
It does. It paints this picture of seamless mobility, controlled by keys instead of permits, that totally downplays the regulatory checkpoints. I mean, anyone who's tried to move a large sum of money across a border knows about KYC, AML.
The endless questions, yeah.
It sounds like a video game where you just teleport your assets. And by ignoring that friction, doesn't the author risk losing authority? If I'm an expert reader, I know moving residency is hard. If the text ignores that, I start to trust the rest of the advice a little less.
So the suggestion is to introduce the concept of regulatory arbitrage more explicitly and to just acknowledge the border friction that exists even for digital assets. It just adds realism.
That's it. It acknowledges the difficulty, but frames it as a solvable problem. So you could expand the Switzerland example, contrast it with a hostile jurisdiction, show specifically how a digital asset is treated differently.
So in a neutral zone, it might be treated under property law.
Whereas in a restrictive zone, it's treated under security law. That distinction is massive for an investor. One means you own it, the other means the government regulates how you trade it.
That's a great specific detail.
And when he says residency and citizenship have also become choices, he should add a sentence about the portability of rights. It's not just about lower taxes. It's about having a passport that lets you leave if things get bad.
And the data location point needs to be more vivid. Jurisdiction as a tool is a nice metaphor, but let's make it tangible.
Describe the difference, a server in a country with strong privacy laws versus one where the police can just kick down the door of the data center and seize the server. Your anti-fragile wealth is suddenly very, very fragile.
It moves the conversation from Switzerland is nice to here is the legal framework your server rack requires, much more actionable.
Exactly. Okay, so finally, the ending, the conclusion, with the phrase, patience must walk beside urgency. It just relies on these aphorisms that kill all the high-energy momentum the essay built up.
I felt the air go right out of the balloon at the end.
Me too. The essay spends all this time telling us the world is on fire, the old maps are useless, disorder is coming, and then it ends with education precedes movement and small positions grow. It feels like safe, generic financial advisor speak.
Like a liability disclaimer. Past performance is no indication of future results.
It does. After promising this revolution, that soft landing just feels anticlimactic. It de-escalates the tension instead of resolving it with a real call to action. The whole point was to reject comfort, wasn't it?
I think so. So the suggestion is simple. Rewrite the conclusion to maintain that urgency. Instead of calling for patience, call for strategic velocity. Move fast in learning, but be deliberate when you place capital.
Strategic velocity. I like that. It implies directed movement. You could replace patience must walk beside urgency with something stronger, like the window to build these structures is open, but it is not static.
Implying it could close. That creates urgency.
And instead of small positions grow as comprehension matures, use active language. Test the architecture with capital you can afford to lose, then scale as the system proves its resilience. It's the same advice, really, but it sounds like a military strategy, not a gardening tip.
Gardening tip is the perfect description. And I think the best way to close is to circle back to the intro, return to that image of the old map.
And explicitly state that the reader is now the cartographer. Something like, you are no longer reading the map, you are drawing the borders.
That brings it full circle. It leaves the reader feeling responsible for what comes next.
Which is exactly what you want from a manifesto. You want them to put the paper down and open their laptop.
So to recap our critique today, first we want to operationalize the abstract concepts. Give us the how along with the what using vignettes and checklists. Second, bridge the gap between DeFi and physical infrastructure to show they are one system.
With the physical as the anchor for the digital. Third, nuance the critique of traditional finance. Use the barbell strategy as a bridge so you're not just alienating people.
Fourth, sharpen the jurisdictional examples to include the reality of regulatory friction. And finally, tighten that conclusion to match the essay's intensity. Swap the gardening metaphors for strategic velocity.
The core thesis here is brilliant. The idea of anti-fragile wealth is so timely and necessary. Dr. Ghamari has identified the problem perfectly. But for this essay to actually change behavior, it needs to hand the reader a wrench, not just a philosophy book.
He has the vision. Now he needs to give us the blueprints.
Refine the mechanics, acknowledge the friction, and drive the conclusion home with authority.
Thank you for tuning in to The Critique. We invite the author to apply these structural edits and resubmit the work. We'd love to see the next iteration. Until then, keep writing.